Rangers, and welcome to Ranger Review YouTube channel. In today's video, I'll be answering the question, how does the National Park Service preserve sites? Let's go ahead and dive right on in. Okay, now, so often when talking about the National Park Service, we bring up their whole goal, their motto, to protect and preserve national parks for future generations. And we obviously know this, but how do they do it? How do they protect these national parks and preserve them so that in the future, hundreds of years from now, they can be available to my great-grandchildren just like my national parks were available to my great-grandmother? Let's go ahead and dive right on in. Quick disclaimer though before we carry on, in today's video, I will only be talking about historical sites. That means buildings, monuments, battlefields. I won't be talking about any of the natural resources that we protect, like rivers, mountains, lakes, animals, plants, so many other things. That is just so much stuff to cover in one video. I'll be talking only about the historical landmarks. So the National Park Service defines preservation as deciding what's important, figuring out how to protect it, and passing it along with an appreciation for what was saved into the next generation. And how do they do this? Well, for starters, we need to understand what we're protecting. Are we protecting a cultural landscape, a historical document, a historical landmark, a battlefield, a town square? What are we doing with this? And once we know that, we can move on into future preservation. A cultural landscape is something like a monument or a building or something that influences the culture around it. It could be a bridge or a lighthouse. And the first step to protecting that is making sure it is not torn down. Now, this might seem fairly obvious and a little bit unobvious if it's like a bridge, because those are kind of useful, but the National Park Service does this by creating it as a national park site. And the historical documents that the National Park Service protects generally are found under most national park sites, so those follow under the NPS as well. Now, in order to protect these lands, the National Park Service carries out a wide variety of historic preservation work programs. And this work is not only in the national park system, but it also is in partnership with local communities and preservation groups and state as well as tribal governments and other federal agencies and organizations and branches that lead out and all kind of intermingle into this one preservation funding that we're using to try and keep these places in the United States safe. Okay, now, so say you created your national park site. It is safe. What do you do now that you have all of this stuff? What do you do with the documents, with the bullets, with the bodies, with the buildings, with the bridges? What do we do with that? The National Park Service doesn't just give it out to each national park and say, okay, fend for yourself, here's some money, here's a site, have at it. No. There is a set of regulations, standards, and guidelines that every national historical park must follow. And of course, thanks to the fact that this is the government and all this information must be disclosed, you can find a very handy list with very long hyperlinks that are super fun to check out and also super interesting to find out how a national park protects its sites. The National Park Service, to encourage consistent practices, has developed standards and guidelines that guide preservation work at the national, tribal, state, and local levels. And each of these pages or resources you can find on the website, like I mentioned earlier, and they go over archaeology and historic preservation, archaeological and engineering preservation, documentation of historical documents, federal agency and historic preservation programs, rehabilitation for when you have something and it's kind of falling apart like a building and you need to restore it, treatment of historic properties, treatment of historic people's properties, treatment of historic properties and cultural landscapes. There are so many ways that the National Park Service uses guidelines to regulate it. And guys, these guidelines ain't shabby. They're the kind of guidelines that were written in the 80s, so the font is like really small and close together, and there's like 3 columns of it, and it fits like so many words into one page. You think that they could fit the entire thing on like a double-sided piece of paper, but in turn it's actually 26 pages. Yeah, they're in-depth. The National Park Service does not cut corners when it comes to preserving a national park. From rehabilitating houses and bridges and monuments and town squares and lighthouses to preserving letters and pages and pictures and paintings and furniture, all of this is encompassed in the National Park Service. So when you become a national park, you're gonna get the whole shebang. All of it is being protected, and that's really what we're paying for. We're paying for the experts to know what it is and to make sure that we can have it for future generations. That means taking pictures, replacing things that might have been lost over time, and finding out and documenting everything that we have now so we know what we don't have in the future. On the National Park website, these leads to links and links of PDFs and articles and pages on how to preserve national parks. And there are so many, I cannot even comprehend it. You think the government is organized? It is organized, and it has so many ways of every situation. What happens when a house or a historic monument or landmark meets a natural disaster like a hurricane or a tornado or a tropical storm? What happens when the water damage gets too great that it causes structural integrity to be compromised? All of these things have happened and experienced before by the National Park Service, and they are one of the leading protectors of historic landmarks in the United States alone. And I haven't even scratched the surface on battlefields and waterways and canals and boats and bridges and so many other things that the National Park Service does to protect these historic landmarks so we can have them in the future. So honestly, all I have to say at the end of this video is visit national parks. And if you can't right now, then research them. I'll link so many things in the description box down below. Be sure to go down there, check all of them out. Well, everybody, that is the end of today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to give this video a big thumbs up and comment down below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear from you. Also, be sure to click that red subscribe button and the little bell next to it to always know when I post new videos. Thank you so much for watching again, and I shall see you next video. Bye!